Hello, welcome to my talk. Thank you very much for joining me and listening. My name is Saussan Khalil. I'm a senior Arabic language teacher at Cambridge University, and my talk today is about conceptualizing Arabic writing in the digital age. This study is based on my PhD research. So I started with the research question, how can we conceptualize Arabic writing in the digital age? I used four main studies to inform my research. The first two sort of pre-digital but very influential studies in the field, of course, we have Diglossia by Ferguson in 1959, Bedawi's Language Levels in 1973. And then looking to more recent studies, I found Internet Linguistics by David Crystal in 2006. Now this was looking at English language Internet linguistics, but it did address the point about studying language online. So that was very useful. Also Translanguaging by Garcia and Way in 2014, which had a lot of relevant points in terms of moving the thinking on from code switching. Okay, so the study itself, I collected data between 2011 and 2018. I used primarily primary data collected from the 6th of April Youth Movement Facebook page, and secondary data that came in the form of later studies in sort of the later period of my study, of people who had identified mixed writing or online language use. And so when I started my study, there wasn't really very much of it. And towards the end, it had started to be recognized. And so that's why I decided to include some of the findings of those studies and compare them to my own. In terms of the methodology, I collected the data and then analyzed the language, but also the motivation that, that I thought was behind language use, particularly with mixed language use. And then finally, I developed and tested the model, testing it on the secondary resources, the secondary data that I had collected in the form of studies looking at mixed Arabic writing or Arabic writing on the internet. Finally, my findings, to be very brief, one of the main findings was that, like code switching and speaking, that language choice in mixed writing is not random, but unlike code switching and speaking, switches are mostly inter rather than intra-sentential. So although I am trying to conceptualize Arabic writing, I did find lots of crossover with speaking, particularly with regards to mixing. However, I wanted to look at Arabic writing as its own domain and not be restrained by the rules for mixing that we find in speaking. So the model itself consists of 7 writing styles that I identified in my study. The first being classical Arabic. Now, classical Arabic isn't used very much at the moment in terms of, excuse me, original writing. However, it's used in quotes from classical literature, from the Quran, things like that. Middle Arabic was another one I came across. I believe middle was intended to be middle between classical and spoken Arabic. However, my own belief in looking at it is that it's essentially a pre-modern style, I have not found it currently being used. And I'll say a little bit more about that in just a second. Modern Standard Arabic, fuṣḥá, I think we're all familiar with that. Intermediate Arabic, which is a label that has been used in different ways. I decided to keep the label as it was a familiar one. However, I have worked towards defining it slightly more to be clear what I mean by intermediate Arabic. I also identified a style through the secondary sources I used through other studies that described what I would call lower intermediate Arabic. There's also colloquial written Arabic, which I would say is the equivalent perhaps of Badawi's educated spoken Arabic. So this is Arabic writing that you would very easily identify as being colloquial. And finally, what I'm calling chat speak. And this is the language of text messaging, using things like emojis, abbreviations, etc. So a fairly specific style of writing. So the uses of each styles, classical Arabic, I would say, is fairly limited to classical texts. Middle Arabic, I would say middle texts, as in texts from the Middle Ages, with features that belong to neither classical nor colloquial Arabic. And these were described in Bellamy and Smith as hyper or hypo corrections. And this is the feature that really I did not find in contemporary Arabic writing. So I have created a fault line between these styles to say that classical Arabic and Middle Arabic are pre-modern, while the rest are in fact modern. So for the purposes of this study, I was only focusing on the modern writing styles, and lower intermediate Arabic, as I have just mentioned, was identified through my secondary resources. So I didn't actually identify it as a style of writing on the internet per se, but it is existent in print media, identified in more sort of lowbrow newspaper or magazine articles, and more satirical style works. It's also been described as fuṣḥá āmmīyah by Rosenbaum in 2000. And so the examples and the sources that I used were secondary sources to me. I didn't really find this style predominant in social media and on the internet. Now, the two techniques that are common in all of these writing styles are borrowing, and that's either borrowing from fuṣḥá or āmmīyah, depending on the style, or code switching. And again, code switching can be between fuṣḥá and āmmīyah, or with both borrowing and code switching, they can be from other languages, so English predominantly. In modern standard Arabic, some of the salient features are typographically marking code switches and borrowings. So even in fuṣḥá, you do find sometimes bits of āmmīyah, but usually it's quite clearly marked. Either it's quoted speech, and so you have speech marks or brackets or sometimes ellipses, or parentheses. There's usually some kind of typographical marker that highlights this is colloquial. In intermediate Arabic, there's a lot of shared lexical items and shared structures. And so the writers employ techniques that narrow the gap between standard and colloquial Arabic. So they really believe in the one language view of Arabic and want to bring a text that can be read in some cases as either fuṣḥá or āmmīyah, or that shares features of both. Now, lower intermediate Arabic, as I said, is sort of more of a lowbrow version, if you like, of intermediate Arabic. So it does share features of both fuṣḥá and āmmīyah, but the switches are slightly more abrupt. And the audience generally that I found to be intended audience were generally less well-educated people. So this is where the lowbrow description comes from. The colloquial written Arabic is, as I mentioned, simply the reflection, if you like, in writing of educated spoken Arabic. The blending between fuṣḥá and āmmīyah is more seamless. The orthography is fairly standard, reflects the fuṣḥá spelling in most cases. And it's found all over social media, in blogs, and even in print literature. In terms of chat speak, I didn't really focus on this. Again, it's predominant perhaps in text messaging, instant messaging, a little bit on social media as well. But as a literary style or a predominant style, I felt that it was sort of outside of the scope of the study. So it contains things like emoticons, abbreviations, more phonetic orthography, Arabese sometimes with the romanization of the Arabic words. So it was slightly separate or outside the scope of this particular study. So focusing on the three main styles, I really wanted to know the motivations behind the use of these styles, and particularly in the secondary data, the secondary resources I looked at, there was a lot of identification of mixed writing, for example, but not really a lot of analysis of why there would be mixed writing, why there would be code switches between fuṣḥá and āmmīyah, for example. And so that was really the third dimension, if you like, to the model. So extremely briefly, fuṣḥá is used more for expressing facts or to give some degree of formality to the writing, whereas intermediate Arabic or colloquial written Arabic express more emotions, opinions, and things like that. So of the data set that I was working with, the Facebook posts that I collected, I categorized the language use by the type of post, what the content was for each post. And I found that the posts that tended to be in fuṣḥá tended to be the more formal posts, you know, announcing group rules, for example, general announcements, you know, if there's a conference or anything like that, or a particular position that the group are taking. So anything to do with formal posts or announcements were generally in fuṣḥá. Knowledge and learning, so anything to do with sort of facts, the pursuit of knowledge, the importance of learning, these were all in fuṣḥá, as were photo and video captions. And these were simple captions that simply stated the content of a photo or a video that was attached to the post. Also invitations, opinion polls, surveys, and questions, again, lending them this air of objectivity or possibly a sort of a scientific air as well. And also reports and quotes. So there were often reports of events that had happened. And so these were reported in fuṣḥá or direct quotes, for example, as well. On the other side, the sort of intermediate or colloquial Arabic, you have things like cartoons, like in newspapers, and jokes, appeals. So often the group would appeal to its readership to do something or to think about something. When they would express ideas, thoughts, and feelings as well. Also photo and video commentaries, and that's as opposed to photo and video captions. So captions were very factual and informative. This is a picture of a tree. Whereas the photo and video commentaries expressed an opinion about the content of them. So this is a photo or a video of a tree. It is very beautiful. Everybody should see it. That last part would be in āmmīyah to illustrate the point. Opinion polls and surveys. So there's a slight overlap here with the fuṣḥā category. However, the difference being that sometimes the opinion polls themselves, the content was different. Other times it wasn't. I also find that the group's earlier posts, so pre-2011, and the group was set up in 2008. So between 2008, 2010, there were a lot more fuṣḥā posts. And as time went on and the events with the protests and the revolution carried through, their posts became more and more towards colloquial Arabic. And finally, their slogans. So again, expressing urgency or their position, their opinion on matters in their slogans. So to give a few examples, I'm going to try and be very, very brief because I can see my timer telling me I only have 5 minutes. So extremely briefly, some examples of fuṣḥá posts, very, very straightforward and clear. For example, this post: إلى كل من اختلف مع شباب 6 إبريل إذا لم تستطع المشاركة فلا تصادر على الآخرين حق المشاركة ولا تبث اليأس في نفوس من لم ييأس وما زال لديه الأمل. Very clear instruction, if you like, to not do a particular thing. Okay, so very formal tone, completely in fuṣḥá, no argument about the language here. Another example of a post in fuṣḥá, and this is part of a much, much longer post, and this is one of the report style ones where they went to visit a group of people in a village, and they were standing in solidarity with them. And so when they came back, they reported the events of the day that they had. And in the middle, this is one of the sentences that they had. So the whole post is in fuṣḥá, and then they have between quotation marks, ما تمشوش هيغدروا بينا بعد ما تمشوا. And then back to fuṣḥá, تكررت هذه النداءات ونحن نغادر. So here you have a direct quote. They didn't change the words, kept them as they are, but they're very clearly typographically marked that this is quote, this is speech. Another type is fuṣḥá with a borrowing from English. So, for example, عند التجهيز لحملة ما أو موضوع أو نقاش ما غير مسموح بفتح أي توبيكات تشتت هذا الهدف. So توبيكات, transliterated from the English topics with the alif ta feminine ending in Arabic. So this could be considered a borrowing from English, but the rest of the post is fuṣḥá. Now, moving very quickly on to intermediate Arabic, some of the examples I found, this is kind of online and offline as well, because this is fairly salient as a literary style. So one of the examples is refashioning colloquial expressions into fuṣḥá. So, for example, this is a line from one of Yusuf Sibahi's novels in Abd al-Malik's study in 1972. Salim 24 قيراطاً. So the colloquial expression Salim 24 قيراط. Here قيراط has been written as قيراطاً to follow the rules of fuṣḥá with the number agreement there. Another technique employed in intermediate Arabic is strategic bivalency, and that's the term used or coined by Majel in 2014. And she looks at Ibrahim Isa's book and the title كتابي عن مبارك وعصره ومصره, or is it كتابي عن مبارك وعصره مصره in the colloquial writing. So this sentence is an example of one that can be read either in fuṣḥá or in āmmīyah. There's no real way of telling simply by looking at the text, which is intended. Now, in intermediate Arabic, there's also, you find it's fuṣḥá, and then there's a switch to āmmīyah. This is taken from the 6th of April Youth Movement Facebook page. And as I said, it's very important to look at the motivation of why there's a switch to āmmīyah. And this is different to the earlier example because it isn't direct speech or typographically marked. It's more seamlessly blended in with the text. However, it is very easily identifiable as āmmīyah. So عندما يملأ الحق قلبك تندلع النار, etc., etc., etc. It's all in fuṣḥá. And then the last line, اسمعوا, the alif here, and I've taken as it is from the text, اسمعوا بيتكلم عن المقاومة وعن الإنسانية والحياة الكريمة. All of this could be considered bivalent as well, but then حاجات قربنا ننساها. So this part is clearly āmmīyah. Before you have بيتكلم عن المقاومة, so this would tell us as well that this is āmmīyah utterance. And so I would say that this is intermediate Arabic. It's fuṣḥá clearly at the beginning, and then it sort of slips into āmmīyah, and looking at the motivation, it's an appeal. They're saying, isma'u, listen to it, watch the video, okay? So this is an appeal, okay? And then finally, that's the timer. So I've run out of time, so I'm going to have to very quickly whiz through the last couple of slides. There's the same sort of thing with a code switch to express humor. So هناك ثلاثة أشياء لا حدود لهما الكون وغباء الإنسان والناس اللي بتنشر الجملة دي. So that's a bit of humor, and that's taken from one of the satirical works I mentioned earlier, and that's from Hallen's study in 2017. Now, colloquial written Arabic is much more straightforward in the sense that it's identifiable as colloquial. شباب إحنا تعودنا هنا كل خطوة جديدة ناخدها سوا. And then in the second line كله تقريبا وافق إننا نعملها دلوقتي عايزين اسم بس للمسابقة. So etc. etc. It's fairly easy to identify as āmmīyah. Now, the implications of this is that the world is changing, language is changing, and we have to recognize that. We also have to understand these changes and adapt accordingly. It's no longer sufficient to say that fuṣḥá is used for writing, āmmīyah is used for speaking. Clearly, many examples show us that that is not strictly true anymore, both online and offline. Writing in āmmīyah is not necessarily a sign of a lack of proficiency in fuṣḥá. So some of the posts that I very briefly showed you show that you can have fuṣḥá utterances that are grammatically correct, etc. And the switches are very intentional, and they provide a specific purpose. And finally, code switching in speaking as well as writing is not random. And so it does follow fairly set or clear rules, as you saw. There's typographical marks, or there's a switch usually from fuṣḥá to āmmīyah, much less the other way around. And again, looking at the motivations, there is usually a reason for the switch or the language choice. I'll have to leave it there. I'm very sorry. I felt that was very brief. There's much more for me to talk about. So I look forward to seeing you for the Q&A after this talk. Thank you very much.